Welcome to Momentum for Change, Voices of the Missouri Movement. This is a monthly podcast produced by your coalition, and I am your host, Nora Mosby, a member services specialist at the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We hope you enjoy this conversation coming to you from Voices of the Missouri Movement. Welcome to Season 3 of Momentum for Change. This is your host, Nora Mosby, and Momentum for Change is a podcast brought to you by the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence in order to lift up voices of the Missouri movement. As many of our listeners are well aware, February was Black History Month and March is Women's History Month. In recognition of both of these awareness months, I am speaking today with Dr. Gloria Johnson. Dr. Johnson, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Dr. Johnson is the founder of Life Source Consultants, Missouri's first advocacy organization founded by and for African American survivors of violence. So, by way of introduction, I'd like to share some words written by the former CEO of MOCADSV, Colleen Coble. She wrote the foreword for Dr. Johnson's book, I Cried Alone, which is here. And she had some wonderful words to say about you, Dr. Johnson, that I wanted to share with our listeners.
Okay.
So she said, Dr. Johnson is one of those rare individuals whose dream of helping abused women became a life work of determination, inspiration, and transformation. As a result, she has changed lives and entire communities. Step by step, she created a program in which women learned that they would not be left alone to suffer through violence and abuse, where hope grew and lives were reclaimed. So that's what we're here to talk about today, Dr. Johnson, about how you made this dream a reality and any thoughts you want to share about that process. So as we're starting our conversation, could you talk to our listeners about who Life Source Consultants are and the work you all do?
Well, Life Source Consultants, it was, I can't say it was a total dream, because what happened was when I started Life Source Consultants, I did not know that I was starting a domestic violence program. And a lot of times people look at me really strange when I say that. But what happened was I was doing a weekly support group for Christian women. And what happened was the majority of the women that came to my support group were victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. We never advertised our group. So I still can't tell anybody how people found us and that they would come and share. And what happened was we had a young lady by the name of Sylvia that moved here from California, and her husband sabotaged everything while she was here, her job, everything. And nobody would believe it. Everybody kept saying, well, she left. She's no longer with him. It doesn't matter. Why would he do this? So they felt like she was not being honest. And I sent her, there was a pastor of a church in our neighborhood that gave us free space. I didn't know him. And so I don't even know how I connected up with him either. But I met him. He lived around the corner. So I met him and I told him what I wanted to do, that I want to start this weekly support group. I didn't have any money. Life Source was not formed at that time. And he gave us space in this church. We had our own room. They put furniture in it for us. And so because he did that, I had Sylvia go to meet with him. Well, unbeknownst to me, he didn't know anything about domestic violence. Mm-hmm. So he told her all she needed to do was come to church faithfully and come to prayer meeting, and everything would be okay. And we know from experience that that's not true. Mm-hmm. And that made me realize that the women that were being a part of our group needed something more than just a weekly group. And I didn't know what to do about that because I worked as an executive secretary. I had no plans of starting a business or anything like that. And so what I did, I ran across a booklet that I have not seen since that listed all of the programs in the state of Missouri that did services, that provided services for women.
Oh, yeah.
So I sent letters to those executive directors, not knowing that that's a no-no. Yeah, yeah, 30 years ago, you didn't do that. And so
Yeah.
they
Can you
didn't.
tell us why they were, maybe wouldn't want you to do that? What was the
Well,
reason
for
behind that?
one, I found out later, it was a threat because they operated with government funding.
Yeah.
So every time a program became a part of the system, the funding was reduced. So
Mhm.
that was one reason. And the other reason was they didn't know me at that time. So they didn't know whether I was African American or Caucasian or anything else. They just didn't answer. I got an answer from a young lady named Becky that was the program manager at the coalition.
Becky,
She
okay.
she called me and asked what did I want to do. And I
Uh-huh.
said, I don't know. I need to start a program to help women that are in crisis. And that was the way that I looked at it. So at that time, the coalition had what they called the little blue book.
Mhm.
And she said, for $35, I could send you our little blue book and it would tell you how to set your program up. I still didn't know it was domestic violence. She said,
$35 is a great deal for the Blue Book.
I know. So I sent the $35 and she sent me the blue book and I set it up. I called my friends to see if they would be on my board.
Uh-huh.
And if they would sign, a couple of them, if they would sign the paperwork to incorporate everything. And so I still did not have a name for it, but I started working on that. A girlfriend of mine that was doing the support group with me had a dream one night. And
Mm.
so she called me the next day. She said, I had this dream last night about the name of your organization. And I said, okay, what was the dream? She said, in the dream, heaven opened up really wide. She said, and rays, sun rays began to come through the opening, and there was a tree there, and they went down into the roots of the tree. And she said she heard this voice say, I am the source of life.
Oh, wow.
And so that was how we got our name. We added consultants on it because we thought that would be professional.
It does sound very slick.
Right.
I
So
like it.
that's how we got the name of it. And Becky helped me, and so I was able to put together what I needed to for incorporation. I had no business sense. I did not know anything about managing business. I did not know what you do to start a business. But I felt like so special that God had put people in my path that would help me.
Yeah.
And and Becky never once said, you're trying to start a business. You don't have any idea what to do, how to do it, and I'm going to help you.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And not knowing whether what I was starting was going to work or be a success. And so we used the Blue Book and put together all of the information that I needed to start a domestic violence program. And that was January of 1994. And so we sent it off and we got our incorporation papers. And then I didn't know where to go from there. I was still doing my group. And I got invited to the coalition meeting in St. Louis.
Oh, you did?
And that was like around March of
Okay,
that
so it was
year.
January 1994. You
Yeah.
started support groups, in the church, and then you went to your first coalition meeting in
Okay.
March?
The support group we started around 1987 after I got my
Oh,
PhD degree
okay,
because I was supposed to go into counseling,
okay.
not start a program. And
Absolutely.
so that was what the support group was about, was the counseling.
So you
It's
got your
using the
PhD in
counseling skills.
counseling and you
Yes.
started your group. Okay. Well, before we
And
get
that,
ahead of ourselves, I want to say 1994 was 30 years ago. So you've been doing this for over 3 decades. And I just want to
yes.
say congratulations on that huge milestone because there's not a lot of people left that can say they've been doing advocacy work in the state of Missouri for over 3 decades. And that's huge. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I hadn't thought about that. I just come to work every day.
Oh my goodness.
So
Did you all
yeah,
do anything? Did you do anything to celebrate your 30th anniversary?
I haven't yet. I people keep telling me I should,
Yeah.
but I can't figure out what would I do.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. Um, maybe we can have a walk or something. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't know to celebrate. I'm gonna let my staff kind of do some brainstorming, and maybe by October, which is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we can do something constructive to
Absolutely.
celebrate, and then I can retire.
That sounds like a fantastic plan.
Yeah,
Um,
it does.
well, I mean, I just think back over all of the years that you've been supporting survivors in your community, and you must have helped hundreds, if not thousands, of survivors transform their lives, just give them a little bit of support that they needed to um, be safe and in the violence that they are experiencing. And so it's really inspiring to hear about the origins of how you have made this um, thing happen that just started informally with support groups and has grown and grown. So you had support groups in 94 and then you went to a coalition meeting. What happened next?
Now, that's the part that's probably, I guess, the dimmest part of the whole 30 years,
Uh-huh.
because I was the only African American at the table
Uh-huh.
and nobody spoke to me.
Oh, really?
Right. I was asked to tell what I was going to do. And so I told that. And at the end of the meeting, there was one young woman that worked for a program called Haven, and they helped the shelters here. And her name was Sydney. She came up to me and gave me her card. And she said, I know nobody's spoken to you, but here's my card. And if you need anything, call me. She said, we help the shelters. Well, what they did was, for our office, they furnished our support group room. They bought us a sofa, a love seat, a chair, a television, and a television stand
Nice.
so that we could have a nice, comfortable room to do support group. And so that was kind of a highlight. Things changed kind of down through the years, but it did take time. But at the end of that meeting, I got a call from the girl that was over the sexual assault program here. And she told me that don't feel bad that nobody spoke to me. She said, you are a threat to them dollar wise.
Ah, yeah, it's always an
And
issue with
so,
funding.
yeah, she explained to me about funding.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know anything about funding. I didn't
Uh-huh.
know anything about grants. And
Uh-huh.
because my friends all said, we'll help you, we like what you're going to do, then I thought that my friends would all give me donations.
Uh-huh.
And so that would pay my rent and things like that, along with my husband helping.
Uh-huh.
Well, I
Let's
found
go.
out,
Tell me about your husband helping. I want to hear about that.
oh my gosh, my husband would loan me money. I have to pay him back though, because the state never sent you money on time anyway then.
Uh-huh.
But he would loan me money. He gave me my first $100 to
Mm,
open up my checking account for Life Source. So he was there 100%.
mm,
And I only had one employee other than myself. So of course I didn't get paid. So
uh-huh.
I worked for 3 to 4 years without a salary.
Oh, wow.
And
That's a
I had
long
one
time.
employee that got paid. Well, the good thing about it was my I have three sons. They were all adults. And so I didn't have any children to take care of. And
Mhm.
my husband went to work every day so he could take care of everything else.
But to work for
And
3 to 4 years without an income, you must have just been really passionate and believed in this vision to make life source consultants happen.
once Life Source started, I did.
Mhm.
In meeting the women that we met with their problems, their situations, they became my life
Yeah.
because my goal was to help them and
Yeah.
to help them make their lives better. And what could I do to do that? And as a matter of fact, there are a couple of our early clients that still are in touch with us.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Because once you
wonderful.
become a client of Life Source, you're always a client of Life Source. We make you part of our family.
Oh my
And
gosh.
you can call us anytime with any problem, any situation, and we'll try to help you. I have great staff.
I love
And
that.
yeah,
So
and they
you
did
all
a good
started in
job.
St. Louis, and we've got listeners from all over the state of Missouri. So, if somebody's never been to St. Louis before, how would you describe the St. Louis community, specifically back in the early 90s when you were starting Life Source?
Oh my gosh. When the St. Louis community was, they were close knit
Hmm.
without us. They really did not include us in things. And so because I had developed a heart for what I wanted to do and what I was doing, I made up my mind that I could live without them
Yeah.
and I could just go on and do what I needed to do. And I still saw people at meetings. I was invited to be a part of the St. Louis City Family Violence Council.
Okay.
One of the executive directors came up to me one day and said, "Everybody at the table looks like me,
Hmm.
so we need somebody different."
Hmm.
And so she asked me would I come to the meetings and would I join, and I did.
Hmm.
And I still learned a lot just from, even though they might not have associated with me, I learned a lot just sitting there because I learned to listen.
Yeah. And I think this was back in the days when so many of the organizations were newer and had to fight also so hard for everything that they had, that it did create some tension when new people were at the table, didn't it?
Right. And we know that the funding for domestic violence programs was new.
Yeah.
So anybody joining could be a threat,
Mhm.
to them. But I didn't know about funding. I had no clue
Yeah.
about grants or anything. So I didn't feel like I was a threat to them because I thought my friends and my husband was going to help me make it work.
Uh-huh. Well, I think it's really important that you were starting, an advocacy organization specifically for, African American survivors of violence. So can you talk about kind of why that was important to you and, kind of anything that you wanna mention around that?
Well, I guess because I, that's where I lived in the African American community, and it seemed as though people didn't totally understand us,
Mhm.
what we believed, what we thought, how and how we made things work, and then we didn't believe. We felt like what happened in the house stayed in the house.
Yeah.
Nobody told what happened. Nobody would tell what happened in the community, and then a lot of us were not aware that it was domestic violence.
Mhm.
I grew up in the projects in the city of St. Louis, and my family lived on the 11th floor of
Okay.
the building. So we knew on every floor, every family in our buildings, but we also knew on Friday night and Saturday night what women were going to get beat up by their husbands.
Oh gosh.
And nobody said anything about it. Nobody did anything about it. It just became unnatural.
Mhm.
We just knew that was going to happen.
Mhm.
And so when I realized that I was doing domestic violence and helping women like the women that were around when I was growing up, it made a difference
Mhm.
because then I could help them make a difference in their lives and start over if they had to, but live their life without being abused. And so it just kind of connected with me.
Mhm.
Um, in the church that we were in, it was never talked about. We would have uh, our, some of our mothers come to church and they would put their head to the side because their eye was kind of bruised,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and the pastor never addressed it.
Yeah.
So nobody was addressing that. But the funny thing was that after I started Life Source, I was asked to do a presentation that April,
Oh, really?
and I didn't have a clue. I
Yeah.
had to learn everything. We didn't have computers, so
Yeah.
I had to go buy books, and I still got a whole bunch of them and stuff. And so um, I had to learn. And so I learned from our clients. I
Yeah.
learned from going to workshops, things like that,
Yeah.
what to do. We didn't get extra money to help pay rent or to help them go out of town.
Yeah.
And so we had to do fundraisers for that. And even then, though, my friends and members of my church, they would help us out with funding for that. They would give us donations so that we couldn't pay more than maybe $50 or $75 on a utility bill, but we could pay that.
Right.
And so they would give us donations to help us out.
You learn you mentioned kind of having to learn as you provided the work, and I agree, you learn so much from supporting survivors, and from the women that you work with. But there are some really just great books out there and trainings. When you think back, are there any books that stand out? I'm a real bookworm and I just love books, but were there any books that you remember in particular being helpful? I know it was a while ago, but
It's a lot of them, and you know what? I can't tell you
I
their
know
names.
it was a long time ago.
They're on my bookshelf at home.
I
And
hear you.
just about 2 weeks ago, I was looking at my books and wondering, what am I going to do with these?
Yeah.
Um, they were counseling books, and then books that do talk about domestic violence and how to help a victim. And so I started reading them. And one of the things we did not do was we didn't tell her to leave, even though we knew she needed to. And
Mhm.
so what we would do was try to build up her self-image,
Okay.
help her realize that as a person, she was valuable and she was important. And when a woman realizes how valuable she is, she's not going to take that abuse
Mhm.
because she would feel like, I don't deserve this. And so that is one of the key things that I learned that I began to focus on. And so that's what we did in our groups. And we would find videos to build their self-esteem up so that they
Mhm.
would look at themselves totally different.
Mhm.
And that was basically the key for what we did,
Mhm.
was to really, it was like, this is what you have to do. And to get involved within our church, I learned how to train our ministers.
Uh-huh.
And if there's a family with domestic violence, but we kind of learned that a number of years down the road because my first client that was in my church that I was in at that time, our pastor would not touch it.
Oh, really?
He wouldn't touch it. None of the other ministers would touch it. And that was really kind of heartbreaking,
Mhm.
but we connected up with her, and she would call me at night. If I called her and her husband was home, he always answered the phone if he was home, but he didn't know exactly what I did.
Mhm.
So I would tell her to call me when he left. And
Okay.
so when he would leave home, she would call me. And then finally one night she thought he was playing the mind games with her. And she thought she was losing her mind. And she called me about 11 o'clock that night
Mhm.
to tell me about it. And so we began to work on how that was a mind game
Yeah.
and that it was a game being played by her husband. It took us a while to convince her, but she eventually did. And so I learned a lot from
Mhm.
my clients. I'm still learning
Oh, absolutely. Me too.
from them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that survivors are experiencing sometimes such extreme isolation as a tactic of the abuse um, that exists in the relationship, that when you break that isolation, you reach out to support survivors, it really does work.
It
Um,
does. It does.
mhm.
And we tell families, if you have a sister, a cousin, or aunt that's being abused, don't desert her, because for years people would say, well, she won't leave. So since she won't leave, then she must like what's going on. But nobody took into consideration how she was going to live when
Yeah,
she left, if
yeah.
she had kids, if she had job skills. Um, and I always use myself as an example that my children are adults. I have great grandchildren now, so if I move you in my house for a couple of weeks and you've got 3 kids, 4, whatever, after a couple of days, I'm going to be kind of tired
Yeah,
because I'm not used to that anymore.
yeah.
And so, that was one of the things that we tried to get families to understand, is to have patience and to take them in. And if they go back, don't get mad at them,
Mhm.
because they might not have the skills they need to
Yeah.
get the job that they need to take care of themselves and their children.
Well, you've spoken about this a little bit already, but I know you've done a lot of work in faith communities. And so I wondered if there was anything else you wanted to say about how faith communities or the church impacts survivors of violence, either in the abuse that they experience or the support that they receive.
Oh, wow. There's a scripture in the Bible that I think that a lot of pastors and members overlook. And I know it's in Malachi, and it says God hates abuse.
Uh-huh.
And nobody thinks about domestic violence when they use that scripture about God hating abuse.
Right.
And so when I do presentations to churches, that's one of my main scriptures, and to explain to them what abuse is. Because a lot of times people think abuse is just the physical.
Uh-huh.
And so we know with the physical abuse, that heals.
Yeah.
But with the mental and the emotional and the verbal abuse, that takes a while. And
It-
a lot of times they don't look at that as being abusive. They just feel like, oh, well, that person is angry and they're just latching out. But they do it over and over and over and over. And eventually you begin to believe it
Yep.
because you hear it so much.
Yep.
But we've trained the church that I attend, I've trained a number of years ago, some of our ministers on working with families and not to give up on them.
Hmm.
And I even taught my pastor about financial abuse,
Yeah.
because and a lot of times people don't think about
It's such a
uh,
huge issue.
it. It is, and I know a woman. She's retired. She's a retired school teacher, and a couple of years ago, she told me. She said, "I do not have any idea where my retirement check goes or my
Oh,
Social
wow.
Security check."
Wow.
Her husband switched it, and she doesn't have access to it.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's how she has lived
Yeah.
because of her age. And now she's, I think, in early stages of dementia. So there's not a lot anybody can do to help her unless her kids take her out of the home and put her in with them.
Mm-hmm. That's so
Mhm.
hard.
Yeah,
Well, I'm glad you're there for her.
I
Um,
try to be.
Speaking of being there for other people, um, I know just working at the coalition, I hear from other organizations, other advocacy organizations that you specifically, Dr. J, have provided a lot of support to them as they were starting their new organizations. And so
Okay.
I know that comes probably to you naturally. You're very passionate about helping other people. But I wonder, as you're thinking back about the beginning of LifeSource Consultants, is there anything in particular that was helpful that other organizations reached out and gave you information about or gave you support around?
My favorite person was Colleen,
Oh, yeah.
because the
For our
coalition.
listeners, Colleen
Yeah,
Coble was the former
yes,
CEO. Yeah.
right.
Yes.
At the coalition, I got support.
Uh-huh.
I was asked to be on the board of directors for a while, and so
Oh,
I got to meet. directors outside of St. Louis.
Mhm.
And because they were outside of St. Louis, they didn't mind assisting me. So what they would do is send me information or
Mhm.
give me information that would help me. And the one thing I have never had a chance to ask Colleen, I meant to ask her before she retired, was what did she do to get our first funding? I did not apply for
Oh,
our
really?
first funding from the state of Missouri. And it was right after the flood. And
Oh,
they were giving money to the domestic violence programs because domestic violence was up. And I got a call from the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services that LifeSource had been awarded $23,000 in funding.
wow.
But nobody ever told me how we got it because I did not write for it. I didn't know how to write grants at that time.
Okay.
And so Colleen came with the director and they came to my house and they showed me how to do all my forms and everything. It
Okay.
was just kind of awesome. But
So did you
I
keep applying for funding after you got that initial funding?
I did, and that initial funding though is what allowed me to pay my one staff person,
Okay.
and we had her on part time, and to move my office out of my basement into office space.
Okay. All right.
And so, and then after that, I know that some people are Christians and some aren't, but being a Christian, what happened was I believe God gave me favor
Mhm.
with two directors of funding, federal and state, and they helped me write my grants.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And
Congratulations
that's
on that.
something, yeah, they um Nancy for the state called me and told me what to write. She
Uh-huh.
said, if you write it this way, it'll be okay and you will get funding.
Oh, that's
And I did.
oh,
And then the girl that was with Volca in Missouri Department of Public Safety asked me to come to Jefferson City.
uh,
And what she did was she showed me, she didn't write it for me, but she showed me key points that I needed to focus in on.
okay.
And she said, I like your program and I want to help you. So I guess I do feel very special because I had the federal and the state government
That's very
helping me
special.
to be able to keep going.
So you got some funding. What were your priorities in terms of growing Life Source Consultants? What did you want to do first with that funding? What's in terms of services?
Was hire staff that
Yeah.
could assist with our clients.
Yeah.
And so I had, in the beginning, I had a part time staff person, and she answered the phone. I did the intakes, I did the group, I did the meetings, and she did a few meetings, but she covered all of the crisis calls for me.
And how were survivors finding out about Life Sources back then?
Do you know what we don't? I was going to say we don't know, but I do know one thing. We have an African American radio station here,
Uh-huh.
and one of the people at the radio station called me and did an interview.
Okay.
And so we did the interview and gave out our information. Also, our first office was in a shopping center,
Mhm.
and they had this, I don't know what you call it, marquee board. And so every year they would put the different office spaces, the businesses on the board. And
Okay.
so on when they would put us up, we would say, there's no excuse for abuse. Call, and we gave our crisis line
I see.
for help.
Yeah. And
And
then
so we would get a lot of calls from that.
did you notice too, a lot of it sometimes spreads by word of mouth? You help one survivor and they'll tell their friends and family members.
We did that, and then also I did a weekly radio program they asked me to do. So I did that, and the amazing thing was my program came on right before one of the most popular Christian women speakers in the country.
Oh,
So I assume they would listen to me and then they catch her. So I had a really good spot. We went to all community fairs and put out our information so that people would know we were there. And we got referrals from
mhm,
churches. We had about 20 churches
mhm.
that would use our name for referrals also.
Okay. That's great. I understand that 10 years ago, you wrote a book, I Cried Alone. I mentioned it in the beginning of this episode.
Yeah.
It's called I Cried Alone Restored Hope and Healing from Abuse. Congratulations on writing it 10 years ago. Happy anniversary for that as well. And in the book, you open with a quote by Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is a feminist writer who I am a big fan of. It sounds like she inspired you as well. And she talked about the importance of sharing African American women's stories. So, can you talk about drawing inspiration from Bell Hooks and why it's so important to share survivor stories?
I met Bell Hooks at it was a conference. They National had a conference in New Orleans,
Mhm,
and what happened was they provided free conference fees and airfare. I think it was for two African American women involved in the program nationwide. So Colleen selected me and another girl from Kansas City
okay.
to go. And so we traveled to New Orleans, and we had 3 days before the conference started that they wanted to work with the African American women to help us understand I guess, the parts that we could play within the movement and the value that we were.
Mhm,
Because basically, you didn't realize your value. And so Hook said, people are asking about African American women and domestic violence. She said, but you have the stories.
yeah,
And so I caught on to that and I realized I did have the
yeah,
stories.
yeah.
And so I just kept working for a couple of more years and I had planned to retire when I wrote that book. That was
Uh-huh.
going to be my retirement thing. And so um, what I decided to share was the lives of women that had come through Life Source
Mhm,
and where they were now.
mhm.
And so a lot of them are still in a good place.
And I think reading about other survivor stories can inspire so much hope. Definitely, it spreads awareness that, a violence is wrong, it's not okay. But it also spreads hope about just about safety and about being able to end the violence that's happening in a relationship.
Right.
So for readers that are interested in buying a copy of your book, is there anywhere it's available?
I think it's still on Amazon.
I think
I haven't
so.
checked in a while, but I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you all, Life Source Consultants over the years has received lots of positive awards and acknowledgments and recognition. As you look back over the years, is there anything that really stands out to you as something you're proud of achieving or proud of being recognized for?
You know, I was looking at that and I thought there's not one in particular. It was each and every one because what it said to me personally is that somebody thought I was doing a good job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't have any one thing that stood out. They all are were good for me.
Well, you have done a good job and you started with an idea and it's grown and grown and grown. And 30 years later, you have a very successful program that's still providing support to survivors in St. Louis. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
March is Women's History Month. And so I wanted to just ask you, as somebody who's been involved in supporting other women for so long, what does Women's History Month mean to you?
For me, when I think of Women History Month, I think about that it's a time for us that are involved in different types of programs and things to encourage our young women that they can accomplish their dream
Mhm.
and that they are not second class citizens, which I think that sometimes some of the men, especially politicians, a few ministers think that we are, but it's a time I think for us to encourage our young women to look at what it is they want to do with their life and
Mhm.
to go after it
Mhm. Yeah,
because I
absolutely.
think they can do it. And for us as older women to encourage them. You know, I think if we can get behind them and encourage them to follow their dream, then they can do it.
Yeah. Well, I wanna ask you about your dreams specifically, shifting just a little bit. So you end your book by saying with a chapter called "My Dream Lives On." Can you talk about any additional dreams you have for the future of Life Source Consultants or the future of your work? You mentioned retirement.
I know it. Nobody believes me.
Nobody believes you.
No, they don't. Um, you know, I my dream for Life Source would be that it could continue to be a part of our community and making that difference so that women that are in abusive relationships that they would always know that there's some help out there for them, but also what I would like to see is that as we continue to do that with women, that it connects over to our young men so that they can realize and understand they don't have to be abusive to their girlfriend,
Right.
you know, or to their wife, that they are important too.
Yeah.
And so what I would really love to see it as a team.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that we are working on here. We have two young women and we have one young man.
Yeah.
So we've got a team of three that our goal is to put them out together as a team in the community to make a difference in the age groups between 18 and 30, and then the teens.
I see. So in addition to the support you all provide support survivors of violence, you're also really interested in preventing violence from happening in the first place.
Yeah,
That's
right.
awesome.
Because they can have a better life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I have to ask you, we hear from people who have similar dreams as you had with Life Source Consultants all the time. We hear about people who are passionate about supporting survivors and want to start either a shelter or an outreach organization in their community. Do you have any advice that you'd like to share with other people who are wanting to start an organization much like you did?
I would say go for it. You know, if we don't succeed at something, it doesn't mean that we're not okay. It
Yeah,
might mean that that's just not for us.
yeah.
But I think that if that's their dream, they can accomplish it.
Mhm.
They just have to not do like I did, but you do need a pad and paper to find out, you know, how programs are run, how to put it together, what's available out there to assist them with funding, and to find mentors
Yeah.
that you can connect up with that would be there for you to encourage you and assist you.
Yeah. And I also just wanna say, I think, you really forged through a time when there was a lot of competition for funding, but we're really not seeing that as much anymore. We're seeing a lot of collaboration, people coming together, helping each other
Right,
out, learning from one another, not reinventing the wheel. And it's
right.
been really inspiring to see how supportive of each other organizations are. And I'll say, especially organizations that have been around for a long time or maybe a little bit more established or receiving funding,
Yeah.
reaching out to supporting newer organizations. And
Mm.
then you also see a lot of, I've been inspired to see leadership who've been in their positions for a long time reaching out and supporting newer executive directors. And that's really cool to see as well.
It is, and I think it's because um, they don't feel threatened. You
Yeah.
know, we have to realize that what we're doing is good, but not feel threatened by someone else that's younger that wants to do the same thing.
Yeah.
because we've made our place, and we need to have others come along behind us so they can keep as Martin Luther King said, keep the dream alive, keep the dream going.
Absolutely. Because we're a movement and we're moving forward, and we have to do
Right,
this with everyone at the table.
right.
Well, Dr. J, this has just been really enjoyable to hear about just your thoughts and experiences as you started and grew Life Source. Is there anything else that you wanted to be sure to share with our listeners today?
No, I just would like to say to them, if you have a dream, go after it.
Uh, I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Johnson. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. We will be back next month with an episode of Momentum for Change. And so, thank you. We certainly look forward to that, and we will see you there.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye.
Thank you for joining us. This has been a recorded conversation now available in both video and podcast formats. A video recording of this episode is available on the MOCADSV YouTube channel under the Momentum for Change playlist. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel in order to receive new episodes in your YouTube feed. You can also find all of our Momentum for Change episodes available to stream on Spotify or wherever you find your podcasts. Momentum for Change is a podcast produced by MOCADSV with post-production support provided by Tim Stillings and promotion by Adrian Maddox. Again, I am your host, Nora Mosby, and we appreciate you joining us for this episode. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next month.